Hey you guys, Sophia, the doc is out here, and welcome back to my channel. So today we are doing a fall sew along. We're sewing up Simplicity 3003, which is this easy to sew pattern here. It is a knit. It is gorgeous, and I'm so excited about making it for fall. My anniversary is next month, and I think I'm gonna wear this top. So I'm gonna make it today with you. So let's make it together. So this is Simplicity 3003. Your suggested fabrics are your stretch knits only, such as jersey, rib knits, stretch velvet, and sweater knits. I am going to be using a jersey knit, and I'm also going to be contrasting in lace. So I'm going to be sewing up UB today, which is the version that the model is wearing. So let's go ahead and talk about what we're going to need for our notions. A and B, we're gonna need one 9-inch invisible zipper. So we already have that. And then for our pieces, we're gonna need piece 1, which is the front of our top. Cut 1 on the fold. We're also going to need piece 2, which is the back of our top. Cut 2. We're going to need piece 3, which is our neckband. Cut 1. We're going to need piece 4, which is our sleeve. Cut 2. And then lastly, we're going to need piece 5, which is our sleeve ruffle. And this is where I'm bringing in the lace. As you can see, I love this lace for the bottoms of my sleeve. So those are the pieces that we're going to need. So once you have everything cut out and marked, let's go ahead and get ready to sew up this top. Okay, so I forgot to mention we are also going to need a little bit of knit interfacing so that we can stabilize the back of our top for the zipper. I've seen people not install the zipper and they just sew it up by stitching the back seam all the way together, but I'm going to install the zipper. So we're going to also need a little bit of interfacing for that. Okay, so I've already fused on my interfacing to my back pieces. This is the wrong side of the back piece, and I just fused on my interfacing there. So the first thing we're going to do is grab piece 1 and piece 2, and we're going to stitch them together at our shoulder seams. So if you guys have been following along with me, you know I always place a pin on the right side of my fabric so that I don't mix up the right and the wrong side, because sometimes they look very similar. So I'm just laying out my front piece here. And then I am going to grab my back pieces. And when you pin, make sure you pin in the seam allowance, not like in the middle, because you don't want to ruin your fabric. So then I'm going to grab my first back piece and I'm just going to lay it on top of the front piece, sorry. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to kind of roll this up so that I can get to my shoulders, and I'm just going to start by matching up my shoulder and pinning. And you're just going to pin, and then I'm going to place a pin in the middle here as well. So that's shoulder 1. So once we get to this point, we're going to go ahead and stitch the front to the back using a zigzag stitch at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then we're going to come back to the table. So let's go ahead and go to the sewing machine. Okay, so here we are at the sewing machine. We're going to change to a zigzag stitch here. And we're going to stitch from the outside to the inside. So you want to stitch from where your armhole is across to where your neck is. So let's go ahead and do that. So 5/8 of an inch, we're going to drop down our needle. And then we're going to slowly begin to stitch and back stitch. Remove your pins. All right, so this is shoulder 1. I want you to go ahead and stitch shoulder 2 the same way. And then if you want to finish your seams, finish them with your serger or your pinking shears, or you can leave them raw since this is a knit. But go ahead and do that, and then meet me back over at the sewing table and go ahead and press this seam out as well. Okay, you guys, so once we have our shoulder seams stitched, your top should be looking like this. We're gonna go ahead and grab piece 3, which is our neck band. And we're gonna go ahead and apply that to our neck edge. Okay, so as you can see, I have my neck band here. I have my dots marked. I have my pin on the right side so that I know which the right side of my fabric is. And we're gonna go ahead and pin one long edge of our neck band to our neck edge, matching the center notches and placing the small dots at the shoulder seams. So that is going to go this way. And you should have a little notch where you snipped your center. If not, you can just fold the piece of fabric in half and snip it. So basically do like this in half and then just snip. So once we have that done, we're gonna go ahead and start matching up our notches all the way around. And we're gonna pin at our notches as well. I'm gonna turn this to one side and I'm gonna match up the dot again with my shoulder seam, making sure my seam allowances from the shoulder are flat. I actually left mine raw just because it's a knit. And then we're gonna continue to turn and pin all the way to the edge here. Okay, so once we have one side done, we'll turn this and work on the other side. So now we're gonna line up the other shoulder dot with the shoulder seam. Again, making sure everything is nice and flat, and we're gonna pin. And then again, matching up the ends here. We're gonna pin there as well. And then you can pin again, however many pins you want. Just pinning to keep everything in place. Okay, so we should be looking like this. Something similar. So once we have that done, we're gonna go ahead and go to the sewing machine and we're gonna stitch, stretching the band to fit using a 5/8 inch seam allowance and a zigzag stitch. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, so here we are at the sewing machine. Again, I have my machine set to a zigzag stitch, and we're just gonna, you wanna stitch this with the neck band on top. So you wanna be able to see your neck band so that if you need to pull it gently, I repeat gently, to stretch it, you can. So we're just gonna go ahead and put that under our presser foot. We're gonna stitch, we're gonna back stitch. We're gonna remove our pin. And again, you just wanna make sure everything is nice and flat. So just use your hand and fingers to kind of feel underneath. Smooth everything out as you go, making sure it's nice and even. Slow down once you get to your shoulder seam and make sure that your seams are laying flat underneath. get to the end, we're gonna back stitch. Okay, so we have our neckband attached to our neck edge. So let's go ahead and press that seam open or finish it on your serger or with your pinking shears. And then let's go ahead and go back to the sewing table for our next step. Okay, so once we have that neckband stitched on, it should look like this. So I pressed my seams open. Now they want us to press the seams toward the top. So open and then down. So go ahead and press them towards the top as well, so that way when we apply our zipper, everything is nice and clean. Okay, you guys, so we're gonna go ahead and work on our zipper, and we're actually going completely off script because I don't like how they want you to do invisible zippers in the directions. I watched a Mimi G sew along years ago, and she has like the best method for doing an invisible zipper, and I've done it like that ever since because it is like flawless and it takes all the like craziness out. So shouts out to Mimi G. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and bring together the back of our top, and we're gonna pin all the way up to the dot here. Before I forget, you guys, if you are interested in more sew-alongs, especially with knits, like if you struggle with knits or you just want like practice or whatever, if you're not comfortable with them, I have 2 sew-alongs over on my Stan store. The link will be in the bio, but you guys, these are like in-depth, step-by-step, like beginner, walk you through it. We're doing this together sew-alongs. The ones that I do, like this one, are more so like if you've been sewing a little bit or a lot. But the ones over on the Stan store are like hardcore sew-alongs. I'm dropping like gems and tips and all the things that you need to know about sewing with knits, especially. I have one on there for pants, and I also have one on there for a top. So if you're interested, head over there and check out those sew-alongs later after this one. But for now, let's go ahead and finish pinning our top together. So we're matching our notches, we're matching the raw edges, and we're just getting this pinned out. I'm gonna pin at the bottom just to make sure everything is even in between. Because sometimes if you pin all the way down and then you get to the bottom and stuff is off, it's like, oh no. So I like to pin at the bottom and then kind of work my way up just to make sure everything is nice and even. I just have random pins, y'all, so don't mind me. Okay, so let me go open my door because it's a little hot. Okay, you guys, so once we have this pinned, this is what we're gonna do. So pay close attention so that we can install this zipper one time, the right way. And again, before we do that, make sure that you have lined up these 2 pieces at your neck seam and your neckband seam, because that has to match. There's no other way about it. That has to match or it's gonna look crazy on the outside. So if nothing else, line this up right here. So the way that we're gonna do this is we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna use a zigzag stitch, stitching from the bottom all the way up 5/8 of an inch. And then when you get to the notch here, go ahead and backstitch. And then we're gonna do a straight stitch basting stitch from the notch all the way up to the dot here. No backstitch, straight stitch. And then we're gonna install our zipper. So just go with me here. So let's go ahead and do that together. Okay, so here we are. So we're just gonna do exactly what we just talked about. So I'm starting with a zigzag, starting at the bottom. Make sure to backstitch. Here. So once we get there, don't backstitch. Just go ahead and clip your threads like so. Okay, y'all, on second thought, go ahead and press open the entire seam. That way we can install our zipper. Okay, so we have our zipper. Now, like I said, my zipper is long, but yours should be 9 inches. And so if this is the top of your zipper, you're gonna place the stop of the zipper 1/8 of an inch below the small dot that we stopped our stitch at. So like right in there. But since my zipper is super long, I am actually going to place where I marked the 9 inches 1/8 of an inch below the dot. So hopefully that makes sense. I wish I had a 9-inch zipper, but I don't. But what you're going to do is place wherever your stopper is on your zipper 1/8 of an inch below the dot. And that's going to be in the seam allowance. So this is the seam allowance that we should have pressed flat. Your zipper is going to be face down. So facing down, 1/8 of an inch below the dot. And I'm literally just going to pin it in place right on the seam allowance there. So again, 1/8 of an inch below the dot here as well. And I'm going to pin it. And we're only pinning through the seam allowance, not through the entire top. So you should only be pinning. Let's see if I can zip mine. Yeah. Only pinning on the seam allowance itself, and that's it. So don't put the pin all the way through. I'm actually going to turn this sideways just so that I can see it a little better. And then we're going to go ahead and pin only on the seam allowance all the way down one side, and you should be stopping around that notch. And then I'm going to turn this the other way, and I'm going to pin again on the seam allowance only, the other side of my zipper. Hopefully this is not confusing, because once you guys get this method for installing invisible zippers, you'll never look at zippers the same again. I promise you that. Okay, so we have that pinned on both sides, and we know that our zipper is even. Okay, and if you don't want to hand baste this, you don't have to. You can certainly go to your machine and baste this with your machine. Just make sure that you're basting only on the zipper tape and the seam allowance and not the entire top. Now that that's basted, I can remove my pins on the first side. And then we're going to baste side 2, and then we can remove our pins on that side as well. We're going to go ahead and go to our sewing machine. All right, you guys, so we have our zipper basted. We're going to go ahead and machine baste it. Be careful not to baste through your current basting, just because you don't want your wrong color stitches to be, permanent. So I am literally going to place one side of my zipper under my presser foot, making sure everything is nice and flat. I have my machine at a straight stitch on a 4, which is my basting. Okay, so I got my zipper out of the way. So again, I'm gonna keep my presser foot along my coil, and I'm just gonna baste my zipper down to the seam allowance with the machine. All right, I'm gonna clip my threads, and I'm gonna baste the other side the same way. So I'm gonna start at the bottom on the other side. I'm gonna flip it like this. And again, right in the center of our zipper tape, only on the seam allowance. Oop, I came off of my coil, which is not good. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now that we have our zipper basted down, let's go to the sewing table. Okay, so the next step, and y'all bear with me, we're almost there. We're actually going to turn our top to the right side. And now you can see if you pin this right, you're looking good with your seams on the outside. So grab a seam ripper, and we're going to gently pick apart that seam that we basted. So you're only picking apart down to the notch. Okay, so I can tell now that that is the permanent part because it's not pulling at all. All right, so next thing we want to do is just pick off those little extra threads, and then we're going to go on to permanently install our zipper. Okay, so once we have everything cleaned up, we're actually going to open our zipper gently all the way down. And now we're going to go using our invisible zipper foot. We're going to place our zipper and zipper tape underneath the foot. And we're going to stitch from wherever your stop is all the way down to where your zipper ends here. So only on the zipper tape and the seam allowance. So let's do that now. All right, so again, we are using a straight stitch here, regular stitch length. I'm going to change out my foot for my invisible zipper foot here. I'm going to go ahead and start on one side. I'm just going to line that up underneath at the line that I drew. And I'm going to place that zipper into the little compartment for invisible zippers. And I like to use my wheel first just to make sure that I don't break my needle. So it went down nicely. So I'm going to stitch. I'm going to back stitch. And I'm going to gently roll my zipper outwards as I stitch all the way down. Again, making sure my seam allowances are flat. And you might have to gently pull to get over that little bump at your seam. That's okay. Just continue stitching. And back stitch. Okay, so we have one side of our zipper installed. I'm going to pull out the basting on that side, not the other side yet. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side as well. So only on the seam allowance, and the zipper tape. So again, gonna drop down right there. Again, use my wheel and we're gonna stitch and back stitch. Seams are placing down. All right, and back stitch. And then we should have a nice, beautiful, functional, invisible zipper. As you can see, like on the back, how nicely invisible that is. Let's go ahead and go back to the sewing table and we'll go ahead and move on to the next step. Okay, you guys, so after we have installed our zipper, the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna fold down. Yours will not have teeth on it. Yours will just be the zipper tape because you have the right length of zipper. But basically we're gonna fold down that remaining zipper tape at the top of the zipper, and we're gonna pin that in place because we're actually gonna baste it into place so that it lays flat once we turn down the collar of our top. So go ahead and fold like that down that end of the zipper or zipper tape for you all. And I'm just gonna use a little bit of, I'm probably gonna use the same color thread as what I've been using to sew this because it might stay in place. So we want it to match. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that. And then I'm just gonna stitch right down the center of that very top part of the zipper. Okay, so once we have our zipper our zipper tape basted down, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to fold the remaining part of the collar or the neck band at that little fold line that we should have marked, and we're going to fold it toward the outside. So this is the outside of the top here. So it was up like this, and now we're folding it over on itself. And you want to make sure you stop right at that little fold line there, which should also be where your zipper is. And then we're just going to put a pin. We're lining up our raw edges as well. So this is going to give us a really nice finish on the outside. So just pin down that. Keeping the zipper and the edges even. So that should look like this on one side. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So again, fold down at that fold line, match up your raw edges, and then pin along here. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go to our machine and we're going to use zipper foot, our regular zipper foot, to stitch 1/2 inch from the raw edge. So that's just gonna finish off this part so that when we fold it out, we have a really nice point here. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so I have my regular zipper foot. I'm gonna place the zipper coil, which you can kind of feel with your finger, underneath the little ridge for zippers here. And then I'm gonna start at the top using my wheel to place my needle. And then I'm gonna go ahead, and this is still a straight stitch. I'm gonna just stitch down the length of the neckband at 1/2 inch seam allowance. to the end of your neckband, go ahead and clip your threads. We're going to have a really nice finished corner with our zipper. So that's exactly what we want. Okay, so you're going to go ahead and stitch the other side of your neckband around your zipper the same way, and then meet me back at the sewing table. So once we have stitched our neckband down, it should look like this on the outside at the top, nicely finished. And so now we are ready to go ahead and move to the next step. Oh, well, actually, before I'm jumping ahead of myself, before we move to the next step, what we need to do is actually press that seam that we just stitched there, and then we're gonna clip at our corner as well, and that's just gonna give it a really nice turnout. So I'm just gonna clip right at the corner on the inside where we stitched there, just like that. We're gonna press this, and then we're gonna turn it to the right side, and then we'll move on. Okay, you guys, so the next thing we're gonna do is turn our top to the wrong side. So we have this part of our collar that we have folded inward. So this is the inside of the top. And what we're gonna do is we're actually going to place the raw edges of neckband over the seam. So here's our seam on the inside, and we're just gonna place that band over the seam, and we're gonna pin it. And we're just gonna keep going along. We're gonna pin this all the way across, right over the seam, but you wanna make sure that you don't mess with the fold here, because then it's gonna look weird on the outside. So just go ahead and go all the way across. In the ditch on the right side of this, but first we're gonna baste this in place. Yes, we're gonna baste again, just because I find that that's like the easiest way. If you've ever stitched in the ditch, you know that sometimes it can get a little tricky from the outside. So I'm just gonna baste this really quickly into place as it is pinned. All right, so let's go over to the sewing machine and stitch in the ditch here to keep our inside facing down. Okay, so stitching in the ditch, I'm gonna go ahead and place my fabric underneath my presser foot right where that seam is. And I'm going to drop my needle down, and then we're gonna try our best to stitch right along that seam. Back stitch. And when you get to the end, back stitch. Okay, so the next thing that they want us to do is to stitch close to the neck seam on the outside. They say we can use a zigzag or a straight stitch. I'm going to use a straight stitch just because I think it looks a lot neater. So I am going to start at my back zipper, And the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to put my presser foot down right along that seam of the neck band. And that's going to be my guide to where I'm going to top stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and drop my needle down. I'm going to stitch and back stitch. And then I'm just going to stitch all the way around. Should have unzipped this just to make sure that you don't stitch your zipper closed, but I knew where to stop. So all right, you guys, so the next step we're going to do is we're going to stitch our front to our back at the side seams. So I have my top turned right sides together, so I'm looking at the wrong side of the top. You can see all my seams here. And I'm just going to turn this to one side so that I can work a little easier. And we're just going to go ahead and pin the front to the back. To the other side, and we're going to pin it the same way. So go ahead and do that, and then we'll talk about our next step. Okay, so once we have both side seams pinned, we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch from the bottom to the top using 5/8 of an inch and a zigzag stitch. So 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and a zigzag stitch. So let's go ahead and go to the sewing machine. Okay, you guys, so again, I'm going to set my machine to a zigzag stitch, the bottom of my top. And back stitch. All right, so go ahead and stitch your other side seam the same way and then meet me back at the sewing table. Okay, you guys, so go ahead and press those seams, your side seams, and then I'm gonna use my pinking shears to just finish off the seams, and then we're gonna move on to our sleeves. All right, beautiful people. So the next thing we're gonna do is grab our sleeves, piece 4. And again, I'm gonna mark the right side in the seam allowance. I think I'm gonna do it at the bottom, just to make it easier to maneuver. So we're gonna do 2 things. We are going to put in a basting stitch. So straight stitch, longest stitch length on your machine, we're gonna stitch from one notch all the way to the other at 5/8 of an inch. And then we're gonna come back again and stitch 1/4 of an inch away from the first stitch in the seam allowance, the same way with a basting stitch. And that's gonna allow us to ease our sleeve cap into our arm side. Let's go ahead and put these basting stitches into place, or gathering stitches, whichever term you want to use. So 5/8 of an inch. Now, don't backstitch, pull your threads long and then clip them. That way we can use that remaining thread to gather our sleeve cap. You want to make sure your threads are moved out of the way because you don't want to stitch them down. I'm gonna place my presser foot right along our first stitching line, and then I'm gonna stitch again. Threads long and clip. So you should have 2 rows of basting stitches. Go ahead and do the same thing on your other sleeve, and then we'll move on. Okay, so now that we have our basting stitches in place, we're gonna fold our sleeve like we talked about, right sides together. And we're gonna pin our underarm, our underarm seam. Make sure your basting stitches are out of the way so that you don't stitch them in your sleeve seam. So we have one sleeve pinned. Go ahead and pin your second sleeve the same way. And then we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna stitch from the bottom to the top using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance with a zigzag stitch. So make sure you go back to a zigzag stitch on your machine at the beginning and the end. All right, go ahead and stitch your second sleeve the same way. Go ahead and press that seam and then finish it and meet me back at the sewing table. Okay, so our next step is going to be to stitch the ends of our sleeve ruffle. So go ahead and grab piece 5. And they are recommending in the directions that if you are using a lace, which I am, you use a French seam. So I think that's what I'm gonna do here. If you're not using lace or something sheer, you can definitely just do a regular seam here, but I am going to do a French seam. So I'll show you kind of both ways. If you're just using regular fabric, this is the right side. You're just gonna, with right sides together, pin all the way down and stitch at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and you're good to go. Since I have lace, I'm actually going to first stitch wrong sides together. I'm gonna stitch wrong sides together at 1/4 of an inch. And I'm gonna do 1/4 of an inch seam allowance with my wrong sides facing. So again, if you're using regular fabric, you're gonna do right sides facing. So I'm gonna go back to a regular straight stitch, drop down my needle, stitch and back stitch. Make sure everything's lined up evenly. And back stitch. If you are doing a French seam like me, you're now going to flip this over so that you now have, you have right sides facing of your fabric. And we're going to encase that first seam. So now we're on we have right sides facing now, like we would have initially. So this is the wrong side that I'm looking at. And you're gonna place that seam that you just stitched under your presser foot, and we're gonna use a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance to encase that first seam. So you wanna make sure you roll out that seam. I don't wanna press my lace or else I would have. I don't want it to get melted or anything. So I'm just going to take my time and make sure that that seam is nice and flat. Now you will see that when we turn this to the right side, you have a beautiful seam, and then the inside is finished as well. It's nicely encased, nicely finished. So that is our French seam. All right, so now we have our sleeve ends ready to attach to our sleeves. So let's go ahead and press that and then go back to the sewing table. Okay, so next thing we're gonna do, no matter which method you use for your sleeve, we are going to gather the upper part of our sleeve ruffle. So this top part, and we're gonna use 5/8 of an inch stitch, straight stitch, longest stitch on your machine, and we're just gonna stitch all the way around, and then we're gonna stitch again 1/4 of an inch from that stitch. And I'm going to stitch with my seam facing me, so I'm looking at the wrong side of this, and I'm gonna do that so that I can kind of manipulate that seam, French seam that we sewed, and make sure it lays down like I want it to. So again, at 5/8 of an inch, we're not back stitching. Flip, and then we're gonna go again, making sure that our first basting stitches are out of the way. So again, we're gonna use our presser foot right along that first seam and drop down, don't back stitch. Go ahead and do the same thing to your other sleeve ruffle. Okay, so once we have our basting stitches in on both sleeves, the next thing we're going to do, and you want to make sure your sleeve is turned to the wrong side. So make sure the wrong side of the sleeve is facing you. And I'm going to start at that French seam. I'm going to use a basting stitch at 1/4 of an inch. And this again is going to be a guide stitch for where to turn up my narrow hem. So basting stitch all the way around at 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so now that I have that in place, I'm going to go to a regular stitch length, still using a straight stitch. And I'm going to fold down right at the line, right at the stitch we just did as a guide, and then I'm going to fold it again. So now it should look like this. I'm going to place that folded, double folded piece under my presser foot, and I'm going to drop down my needle right in that fold, right in that folded piece. And so I'm going to use my fingers to tuck and roll that seam as I go. So I'm going to stitch, I'm going to back stitch, and again I'm going to take it one little piece at a time, slowly rolling, and you can feel with your finger where that first stitch is. So now we have a nice, beautiful rolled hem, narrow hem, and our sleeve ruffle is complete. So go ahead and finish your narrow hem on the other sleeve the same way, and then meet me back at the sewing table. Okay, so now that we have our sleeve ruffles finished, we're gonna go ahead and grab our sleeves, and you're gonna turn your sleeve to the right side. So make sure you turn it to the right side. I cannot stress that enough, or else your sleeves are going to be backwards or inside out. We don't want that. So I'm going to work on one sleeve at a time. I'm going to grab a ruffle and I'm going to turn my ruffle to the wrong side. So you should be looking at the seam of your ruffle. And we're just going to place the sleeve inside the ruffle, and we're going to match the underarm seam with the ruffle seam. And if you did a French seam, just look at the outside of it to match it as best you can. And so now this is where our basting stitches come into play, because I'm gonna grab a pair of them and I'm gonna start to gather the ruffle at the top. You should have two. Okay, so just gather, and then just use your fingers to distribute that ruffle. I'm gonna pin on the opposite side of the seam, and then I'm just gonna kind of use my fingers to distribute the gathering. Well, we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch at 5/8 of an inch, and then we're gonna stitch again 1/4 of an inch from the first stitch within the seam allowance. So if you want to, you can baste this into place before you stitch it. But I'm just gonna go ahead and stitch it right out the gate here. So we are again using a straight stitch. I'm gonna stitch on the inside of this. So I'm stitching on the sleeve and not the ruffle. So we're using 5/8 of an inch, straight stitch. We are going to stitch and back stitch. All right, so we have done our first row of stitching. So now we're going to go ahead and stitch again 1/4 of an inch from the first seam. And back stitch. All right, so now we have one sleeve ruffle attached. Once you have that done, press that seam and clip your threads. And then if you want, finish it with your serger. I'm gonna finish mine with my pinking shears. So go ahead and stitch your second sleeve ruffle on the same way, and then meet me back at the sewing table. Okay, so once we have our ruffles attached to our sleeves, we're going to press the seam towards the sleeve. So this way, and that's going to press the ruffle out on the outside. So go ahead and go to the ironing table and press your seam towards the sleeve. Okay, so again, if you're sewing with lace like me, be very careful when pressing things because you don't want to melt your lace. You may have to turn your iron down to a very low setting, but just be very careful. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to stitch our sleeve into our armhole. So go ahead and grab your top. Before you do that, go ahead and turn your sleeves onto the right side so that again, we don't stitch our sleeves on inside out. So go ahead and turn them before you grab your top. So I have my top here. First, I have my top on the right side for now. So the right side is facing me. Before we flip it onto the wrong side, we're gonna make sure it's the right sleeve. So I'm gonna line up the underarm seam of my sleeve with the top, and I'm gonna match my notches here. So I have one notch here and two here. So I know that's not the right sleeve. I'm gonna grab the other sleeve and I'm gonna line up that underarm seam. Now I have two notches here and I have two notches on my sleeve. Hopefully you can see that. So I know this is the right sleeve for this side. And I'm gonna pin right at that underarm seam, making sure everything is matched up nicely. And once I have that pinned, I am going to flip my top onto the wrong side. So I'm just gonna flip it like that. The whole top. It'll come on through. There we go. Okay, so now I have my sleeve inside of my top. I already have it pinned, so we're good to go. And then I'm gonna start to match up those notches on the sleeve and the arm side. And then make sure you don't pin your basting threads, because we're gonna need those in just a second. So again, I'm pinning at both of those notches. Make sure your notches match. And then you should have either a dot or I have a little clip somewhere. And basically you're just gonna line that up or match that up with the shoulder seam of your top. And you're gonna pin. Okay, so once we have the bottom and top pinned, we are now going to use our basting threads to gently pull and ease our sleeve cap into our arm side. So just gently pull a little bit, just enough to match up your raw edges and pin. Just like that. So you see we didn't have to pull a whole lot. And then I like to just kind of pull just to make sure everything is nice and even and nothing's puckering. So I'm going to turn this the other way. I'm going to repeat that step. To the sewing machine. So baste this in place. And then once you have it basted, baste your second sleeve the same way. And then we're going to go ahead and stitch our sleeve into our arm side. And we are almost done, you guys. All right, so here we are ready to set in our sleeves, which we have basted. So I'm going to stitch on the inside of this. Again, we're using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. This is going to be a zigzag stitch. All right, we're back to where we started. Go ahead and back stitch. All right, so sleeve one is in. Now I like to go ahead and remove my basting stitch, and then we're going to make our second pass of stitches. So again, I'm going to start at the underarm seam, line up my presser foot with the first row of stitches. And back stitch. Okay, so go ahead and stitch your second sleeve in the same way, and then go ahead and press that seam and then finish it, and then meet me back at the sewing table. All right, you guys, we are to the very, very end. So we should have our sleeve ruffles attached. So the last thing we're gonna do is we're gonna turn our top inside out, and we're gonna do our bottom hem. And they have us turning this up 1.25 inches, and then stitching 1/4 inch from the raw edge and then 1/4 inch from that. So I am for my hem. So that we are going to do. So that's about 1.25 inches. I'm going to grab my pins. And the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to pin it at the top. I'm going to pin it at the bottom. Okay, so I am actually going to mark 1/4 inch from the raw edge. So now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to use a straight stitch. I'm not going to use the smallest stitch length. I think I'm going to go up to like a 3 or 4, just because it's going to be like a top stitching and I don't want it to look like crazy. So we're going to stitch all the way around on the line, and then we're going to move in 1/4 inch, and we're going to stitch again, and then we'll be done with our top. Straight stitch. And I'm going to go up to like maybe a 3.5 even, just because this is going to be like a top stitching. So we're going to stitch and back stitch, and then we're just going to follow our marking. And back stitch. Okay. So if you turn this over to the right side, you see our stitches. This is what I meant. We didn't want our stitches to be too tight with the top stitch. So that is why I went up to a 3.5 on my stitch length. We can go ahead and remove our pins, starting again at the center back seam. And back stitch. All right, so we have successfully stitched our hem into place. We should have 2 stitches like this, and it should look really neat, nice and neat on the other side. It kind of looks like a twin needle stitch, but we didn't do a twin needle stitch. So once you clip your threads, press this hem, and then if you want to finish this little piece, you can. We are done, you guys. Congratulations, you made it. You finished this cute fall top, and I hope you enjoy it forever.